everyone should be frugal. I know that's a blanket statement, and I usually try to stay away from making blanket statements because we're all different, and therefore blanket statements are almost always going to be at least a little bit untrue. But I feel that frugality is something different. It certainly stands to benefit us financially, but I think there's actually a lot more to it than that. And as a result, I think that we could all benefit from becoming a little more frugal. Today I'm going to be explaining why I think that is. I'll start by talking about why you should care, for one, and defining what I mean by frugal, because it's a word that has a lot of different connotations depending on who you talk to. Then I'll finish by going over the benefits of frugality. Not only from a financial perspective, but from a physical, mental, emotional, and even social perspective as well. Let's get started. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a link to the investing platform M1 Finance. Get started investing for free today. So why should anyone care about becoming frugal? Unless we're living paycheck to paycheck, why would any of this even matter? Well, to put it simply, I believe that becoming more frugal will improve just about anybody's life in at least two ways. The first is that it'll allow you to make your money stretch further than it currently does. This either means that you'll be able to work less if you have other projects outside of work that you'd like to be able to give more time and attention to, or work more on different things than you are now. Perhaps there's a career change you've been wanting to try out, or another project that you really want to sink your teeth into at your current job but haven't been able to for one reason or another. Either of these moves could be pretty risky, but they become less so the more frugal you are. The second is that it forces you to be conscious of your use of money, and enables you to use more of it on the things that you enjoy most. This is almost certainly going to raise your life's enjoyment, even if your actual income and expenses don't change that much at all at the end of the day. I mean, just hypothetically, if I was paying $3,000 a month for housing, but there was another home that I would enjoy just as much that would only cost me $1,500 a month to have, I'd want to know about it immediately, if not sooner, because there's a lot of other things I could enjoy doing with an extra $1,500 a month in my pocket. But with that being said, let's talk about what it really means to be frugal. Because I'll bet that when I brought up frugality, at least a few of you conjured up mental images of Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants or Ebenezer Scrooge. But those characters aren't frugal. They're cheap, they're stingy with their money for sure, but they're not frugal. You can be frugal while spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, just as much as you can be frugal spending $30,000 a year. Because as I just hinted at, frugality isn't about how much money you do or don't spend. It's about how you spend the money you spend, and how you don't. Frugality, at least as we'll define it today, is a measure of joy per dollar spent. And if you think about some of the purchases we make, regular or irregular, large or small, you'll notice that some of them do, in fact, produce a greater amount of joy per dollar spent than others. And the same item may not create the same amount of joy per dollar spent every time. Just as a hypothetical example, let's take a look at John and Jane and their 3 kids. John and Jane live in a 900 square foot, 2-bedroom apartment, which, as you can imagine with 3 kids running around, can be pretty cramped and stressful, like every day. But it only costs them $1,500 a month, so they've put up with the drawbacks so far. However, recently John got a promotion, and they now have enough money coming in each month to afford a home. So they decide to start searching, and eventually they find a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home that's 2,000 square feet. When all is said and done, the home will cost them $2,000 a month. But compare that to the benefits it brings, such as everyone having their own bedrooms, which probably leads to less stress and arguments from the kids in particular, the larger space for the kids to roam around in, possibly a yard of some sort to play in, and of course, the ability to make the home your own through decorations, remodels, and so on. And it's no contest. The home is going to bring John and Jane and their kids a lot more joy per dollar spent than the apartment will. Yes, it costs more, but at the same time, it is the more frugal choice because they aren't just wasting another $500 a month on housing. They're getting a lot out of that extra money. And in their situation, it's almost certainly going to be more than worth the money. However, this is often only true to a certain point. Say that John and Jane were happy with their life 30% of the time in the apartment. That's around 9 days out of the month. You don't need me to tell you that this is a less than ideal situation. It means that John and Jane are spending about $167 per day worth of enjoyment in the apartment. Once they move into their new home, they estimate that they're happy with their lives in the home around 80% of the time, or 24 days a month. Because they've now got enough space and they're able to make things their own, but maybe there's a couple of things that they would like better. But anyway, this means that they're now spending around $83 per day worth of enjoyment in their new home. And that's obviously a fair bit better than the apartment, as we expected, but what if they moved into a second home that cost them $3,000 a month instead of $2,000? It still has 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, but it comes with a little more square footage and some higher-end appliances. Is it worth the money? Well, that'll no doubt depend on John and Jane's tastes, their financial situation and goals for the future. But strictly from a frugality perspective, we'd have to ask, how much more joy does this $3,000 a month home bring? And we have to consider this question from both the perspective of how much joy will it bring us in the here and now, as well as the long term. Because we, as humans, are incredibly good at adapting to things. It's one of the major ideas behind lifestyle creep. What was once a major luxury that we took great enjoyment in having can, over time, produce less enjoyment for us as we just get used to having it. A common example for a lot of us would be our first car. Sure, when we first get it, it brings us an incredible amount of joy. We've never had the kind of luxury of having that kind of freedom of mobility before. But after a few months or years, that car is just the thing we use to get from point A to point B. So the difference between having a $20,000 car and a $30,000 or $40,000 car may not be quite so huge from an enjoyment perspective at that point. Unless you're really into cars, I suppose. Now, as some of you no doubt already noticed, no matter how many days John and Jane are happy with their hypothetical $3,000 a month home, they'll never be spending less than $83 per day of enjoyment. Even if they loved every day in that second home, they're still going to be spending about $100 or so per day of enjoyment. But there's something to be said about the level of enjoyment within each day. Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, John and Jane's first house averaged a 5.5. Technically, that's above average, and they may have counted all of those days that were above average as days they enjoyed. But there's certainly a big difference between a 5 or 6 out of 10 score and a 10 out of 10 score. But you get the idea. Frugality is a way we measure how well we're spending whatever money it is we're spending. It's dependent on our own tastes and goals because we all value things differently. Therefore, those who are more frugal than us have simply managed to figure out how to spend their money more optimally based on their own tastes and goals. And to become more frugal ourselves, we simply need to become more aware of what we're spending our money on and deciding whether we want to continue spending that much money on those things, or in some cases, any money at all on those things. So with that out of the way, let's get into the financial benefits of becoming more frugal. The first and most obvious is that most people will not be wasting nearly as much money as they did before they began making an effort to become more frugal. According to Vicki Robin, author of the book Your Money or Your Life, from which much of this video was inspired, on average, people who have followed the steps and become more frugal will cut their expenses by about 20 to 25%. And she said that this range has held pretty true across differing income levels. If we look at data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey, people spend over $60,000 a year on average. So if those who have made the conscious decision to try and become more frugal with their finances cut their spending by 20 to 25% on average, that would mean that the typical person stands to save anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 a year, or $1,000 to $1,250 a month, by becoming more frugal. That, on its own, is more than enough to max out an IRA or HSA. And it's almost enough to max out a 401k. And if you did that, you would cut your time to achieving financial independence significantly. Let's say that Bob spent $60,000 a year before making the decision to focus on becoming more frugal. At this point in time, he needs about $1.5 million put away in order to be considered financially independent according to the 4% rule. If we assume that he was investing $300 a month and earned 8% per year on his money, Bob would take 46 years to reach financial independence in his current state of spending. Once he made the decision to become more frugal, he was able to cut his expenses down to $45,000 a year. This lowers the amount he needs to have put away to be considered financially independent from about $1.5 million to $1,125,000. If we assume that he saves the excess cash flow that he's created by cutting his expenses, that would mean Bob is now investing about $1,550 a month towards financial independence. With an 8% rate of return per year on his money, he would reach financial independence in just 23 years. That's literally half the time it took him before becoming more frugal. So quite the difference if you ask me. But those financial benefits are far from the only benefits that he'll receive from going through this transformation. In addition to having more money to set aside for retirement, or whatever he chooses to do with it, and potentially enjoying the things you spend money on more regularly already, as we saw with John and Jane's example moving into that first home, you'll also likely see some improvements in psychological and physical health. I say this because a lot of people stress out over money. It's often actually cited as one of the biggest, if not the biggest, reasons for divorce, which brings with it a whole host of other long-term problems. And what's more, stress in general is linked to 6 of the leading causes of death worldwide. It's linked to heart disease, cancer, lung ailments, accidents, cirrhosis of the liver, and suicide. Just looking at a few of these, heart disease is the leading cause of death worldwide, with an estimated 24% of deaths in 2017 being as a result of it. That's 1 in 4 deaths. Cancer is the second, with about 21% of deaths being linked to it, and unintentional injuries or accidents account for another 6% of deaths. Now, stress is far from the only cause of any of these ailments. I mean, things like a good diet and exercise, as well as regular checkups, would go a long way towards lowering these numbers, and all of those things could be accounted for when you're putting more of your funds towards things you value, especially if your health is one of those things. And it's not like I'm trying to say that your life will be totally stress-free if you become more frugal, but what I am saying is that becoming more frugal will most likely put you on a path towards being less financially stressed. And a less financially stressful life may help you avoid unnecessary stress in some other areas as well. And when over half of all deaths worldwide are linked to causes that are sometimes associated with stress, I think it's something worth considering, because we all deserve a fully well-lived life. Beyond that, becoming frugal may also help you from an emotional standpoint. Several studies have pointed out that a sense of fairness is key to leading a happy life. We are a social species after all, and one of the traits common amongst social species is the tendency to compare ourselves to others. When we look around and see that our hard work is paying off, and it's enabling us to have everything we need, and even quite a few things that we want, that feels good. Sure, there may be others who have some things that we don't, but that's okay so long as them living that lifestyle isn't harming our ability to provide for ourselves, and we feel that they're also doing something to earn it. For example, I don't hold a grudge against doctors for making good money. They're providing a very valuable service that all of us will need eventually, so I don't mind that they're being paid well. As a matter of fact, I rarely even consider making the comparison in the first place because, to this point, I've been very fortunate in the sense that I've been able to adequately provide for myself, and I can be content with that. Whereas, hypothetically, if doctors were somehow creating an environment that actively stopped me and the rest of us from adequately providing for ourselves, all while pulling in millions of dollars a year and driving a different Ferrari into work every day, except Fridays, which they take off to have parties on their yacht, it would feel a lot worse. The last benefit of frugality that I wanted to mention today is the potential social benefit. Because when you become more frugal, you are going to become much more aware of how much is enough for you and the lifestyle that you want to lead. This is just a natural outcome of going through the process of analyzing your spending and figuring out whether you're spending too little, too much, or just enough to live the life that you want to live. But what happens if you find yourself in a situation where you have more than enough? Take a doctor who makes $250,000 a year but only needs $100,000 to live the life that they want to live. What do they do with the rest of the money? Well, that obviously depends on the person. But sometimes they give it away, or at least some of it away, either to friends and family, charities that help those in need, or to the people who are in need directly. And those actions can have pretty significant positive effects on the people whose lives are touched by that doctor's generosity. Another thing that you'll sometimes see when people have enough for themselves is that they'll give their time, knowledge, or energy towards helping others, which can obviously have very similar effects as to what our doctor friend did. I mean, just thinking back to my own life, I think of my dad. He wasn't making $250,000 a year or anything like that, but he did have enough to be able to take the time to teach me about a lot of things. One of them, of course, being personal finance and the inspiration for this channel. And that's had a tremendous effect on my life. I've been able to start saving while I'm young because I understand the importance of compound interest. I've been able to budget and, for the most part, stay out of debt. And, of course, I've also been able to make videos for this channel, which has the potential to help some of you with your finances. And who knows, maybe you pass on some of the things we talk about in these videos or in the comments section onto your friends and family, which may help them take charge of their finances. And on the snowball builds because one person took the time to pass their knowledge onto someone else. And maybe I'm overblowing this whole thing, but to me, it's absolutely amazing how big of an impact such a seemingly small thing can have over time. And I think that the more of us that learn how to be more frugal with our money, the more of those seemingly small things we'll be able to do. And that's why I think we should all try to be a little more frugal. But what do you think? Do you think the benefits of frugality outweigh any potential costs? Are there any other benefits of frugality that you've experienced that I've missed? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.